You know, there's something about the darkness on an abandoned road that gets to you. What I saw that night on Old Quarry Road still haunts me. Oh, I used to be such a disbeliever. I laughed at ghost stories and thought it was all a lot of bunk. But not after that night, buddy. My view changed forever. It all started on a cold October night. My friend Jake just got a new car and wanted to test it in a quiet place. We lived in a small Ohioan town named Millfield. We ended up on Old Quarry Road, a forgotten path since they built the new highway. The road is narrow, with trees like some kind of strange tunnel. Barely cutting the darkness, the headlights splashed the cracked asphalt. The only sound around was the tires. We talked about trivial things, probably trying to dull our growing unease with each mile passed. After half an hour, we found an old house. It was almost swallowed by vegetation. It was two-storied, but for years, standing with everything forgotten in it. The windows were broken. The wood was rotten. It looked like a scene from some movie about horror. Driven by some foolish curiosity, we decided to stop. We turned the car off and got out. The night was shrouded in this eerie silence. Ghostly light fell onto the house from the full moon. Jake, who always acted bold, proposed we go inside. With dread at the pit of my stomach, I acquiesced, and a shiver shot up my spine. Inside, the smell of mold and decay greeted us. Everywhere, graffitied and burned walls, broken furniture and cobwebs. The floor was creaking beneath our feet. The atmosphere seemed stuffy, as if the house was peering at us. We walked deeper inside the rooms, but there it was again, that low sound, muffled and strange. I looked at Jake, who had a face paler than mine. "You heard that?" he asked shakily. I nodded. My heart was now definitely racing. We crept up the stairs. The quiet seemed to magnify every footfall. The noise was a lot louder now. Someone, or something, was up there. On the top landing, a bedroom door was partially open. The moon outside had come from behind the clouds, and now light shone through the window, creating weird shadows on the walls. We found out that noise as we opened the door. In the room sat a woman in the corner of the room. Long, tangled hair obscured one of her eyes. She was still rocking backward and forwards, but since we were looking from behind, we couldn't make out what she was murmuring. "What now?" I whispered fearfully. I had the utmost doubt in my mind that we were to go up to this woman, yet we couldn't just run away at this point. Jake moved slightly ahead, sneaking up for a closer look. The woman had stopped her rocking just as he turned and got a few feet ahead of us, and at a snail's pace she turned around. The face was just inhumane. We saw broad, blank eyes and a gaping hole of a mouth that might as well have been ripped open. A bone-chilling scream came from that horrid mouth, and all of a sudden, she was rushing towards us with inhuman speed. We ran out of the room, stumbling down the stairs, almost falling. The scream echoed through the house. We reached the car, locked in, out of breath, and start the engine. That woman stood at the entrance of that house, looking at us with those empty eyes as we drove off. The road never seemed so long. Only when we got back into town did we start talking about what we saw, but nothing made sense. Since that night, Old Quarry Road and the house on it have become a recurring nightmare. Jake and I never spoke about it to other people again, fearing they would call us crazy. But I know what we saw was real, and I still feel those empty eyes watching me when I close mine. A few weeks later, Jake and I were in a bar in Millfield, trying to ease the tension with a few drinks. He looked dejected, the experience clearly taking its toll on him. During a conversation, he discovered that he had researched the house and discovered some disturbing things. In the early 1900s, an entire family disappeared there, and the house gained a reputation for being cursed. Now, if that didn't give me the chills. The more Jake talked, the more I was sure that something terrible would happen now. Jake said he was coming back, so it was as if he tried to come up with some kind of retribution or find a way to not think about this stuff. I did talk him out of it, but he was very determined. He felt the need to resolve it. The night he went back to the house, I stayed home, uneasy, but too scared to join him. I got a message from Jake saying that he had arrived and everything was fine. After that, silence. I tried calling several times later, but no answer. I went to the police the following day, but they didn't take it seriously because he hadn't been missing for a long time. And then, I decided to go there alone and see what happens. As I arrived, everything appeared the same, yet there was some difference. It felt heavier in the atmosphere, like the house knew I was there. I called for Jake, but only the echo answered me. I opened the door to that room, and my heart was beating. And there stood Jake. But he wasn't like I'd figured. He was looking up and talking to the wall, something that I couldn't make heads or tails of. His eyes were vacant. His face was miles away. When I tried to remove him, he started screaming in a desperate voice that resonated all over the household and all tied the knots inside me. No alternative but to move out of the place. He was so traumatized by whatever had happened that he couldn't find his voice. I was able to bring him back into the car, then we headed off towards a nearby hospital. He was in shock. He couldn't say anything that made sense. The doctors were sure he had quite a severe case of trauma, but all the bruising on his body did not fit his story. Jake has never been the same since. He is now put up in an institution where he cannot recall what happened that fateful night. As for me, and it's the memories that I have to live with, knowing something awful lies in that very house, waiting for its next victim. Old Quarry Road continues standing, continuing to show that it's there, rotting itself, so it can be a hiding place for some of its darkest secrets. And when passing by, it sends a shiver up my spine as it's saying, remember, some things in the world really must be challenged. Please like and subscribe if you are enjoying. Let me tell you about when I had to take this temporary job at the mortuary in the village where I grew up. I had a lot of debts to pay off, and since the town was going down, I thought it was a good opportunity to make some quick money. What awaited me were the scariest days of my life. The village always had that mysterious air, with its old houses and deserted streets after dark. Most of them were old folks who would tell each other stories about strange things happening around here, but I never took much interest in that. That is until I started working at the mortuary. This mortuary was this little old building made of stone, with tiny windows that allowed in very little light, and an all-pervasive smell, sickeningly pungent, of the mix of disinfectant and something older that defies identification. There are 3 main rooms in the mortuary: the reception, the autopsy room, and the body storage room. I got to the morgue at approximately 2200 HRs, just like the usual days. It was dark, so dark actually, and no noise could be heard, but a whisper of the wind shaking the trees. Somewhere around when I entered, I felt something looking, or I got chills on my spine. But I simply went into denial and started my shift. The first hour was regular. I was just organizing some papers when, in the autopsy room, I heard something fall. I walked over, and everything was in its place. So I returned to work, but it still felt like someone was watching. Moments later, I was in reception when I saw the scalpel from the corner of my eye, shifting a bit on the table. I slowly got closer to figure out if it was my imagination. On picking up the scalpel, a cold draft passed over me. That's when my heart skipped a beat. I wanted to look at it closely. I went back into the autopsy room and began inspecting every cabinet, every drawer. Finally, in one locked drawer, I found an old diary with leaves that had yellowed from the passage of time and writing that was almost unreadable. I began reading as my curiosity was piqued. It was the diary of a mortuary worker. Some of the notes were on strange events, for example, bodies that moved on their own, and voices that seemed to come from the walls. Fear and doubt began taking up space in my mind. On my round the following night, a shadow zipped down the hallway quickly. I rushed over to find out who was there, but nobody was nearby. The cold sensation started going through my entire body, worse than before. I decided that the next night I would lock myself in the reception, but the noises and shadows didn't stop. They continued to torment me. But the nights that followed were worse. Shadows came in more often, and now and then, heavy footsteps could be heard, as though someone would come closer, yet no one was visible. The mortuary, which had looked before like an old, poorly kept house, had started to look like something out of your worst nightmares. It became too unbearable. Once I bolted out of the mortuary in the dead of night in the middle of my shift, but upon trying to open the door, it was locked. I couldn't do anything to get out. Panic entered me, and I started shouting for help, but nobody heard me. The following day, the villagers found me unconscious in the reception. They were tight-lipped upon my explanation of what had happened. Some peered their faces down while some gazed away from my eyes. That moment, I realized that they knew something, but did not want to talk about it. I decided to go back to the mortuary one last time to face my fears finally. I had come to find the truth about what lay there. Walking down the hallways, I felt something trailing close behind me. I turned back and saw a pale face with vacant eyes. One spirit that indeed did not belong to anybody who ought to be out there seemed encapsulated in that location for ages. I left the mortuary that morning, knowing I would never go back. The experiences in my life had been permanent. I learned that things are beyond our understanding, and sometimes it's better not to mess with the unknown. The story made me reflect on everything about life and death. Not the mortuary, but the last house for bodies in the village. The torment of souls still trapped in it. I never again disbelieved the stories of the old folks, and every time that I passed close to the village, I felt the cold shivers go down my spine, and an enlightened, renewed respect for all that we cannot see. Let me tell you about something that went down with me and the folks in San Antonio, Texas. This is the kind of tale that would make one wish it never happened, but would only screw up one's brain real good by the time they are through reading it. The whispers of an unknown woman dwelling on the edge of the city are what set things off. People started gabbing about the woman in the thicket a few years back. They claimed to spot her nearly every night, strolling around with dead animal carcasses. It was straight up chilling. This frail-looking lady with a face that just screamed evil. My first run-in with her happened one night after a long grind at the cop shop. The fog was thick as molasses, and the cold cut right through you. Out of nowhere, I spot movement among the trees. My heart starts pounding. As I get closer, I see it's a lady hauling what looks like an animal's body. She locks eyes with me, sending a shiver down my spine. I hauled ass home without looking back. They say she's some kind of witch who got booted from town centuries ago. Since then, her spirit's been haunting the thicket, getting payback on locals by snatching their pets. Some folks swear she's still kicking, living off the land and doing who knows what out there. Pet disappearances started happening a lot. Dogs, cats, you name it, gone without a trace. The cops were scratching their heads, no solid leads to go on. The town was split on what to believe. Some thought she was a vengeful ghost, while others swore she was a real person, maybe a witch into dark magic. The superstitious ones talked about her doing creepy rituals in the thicket, using those poor missing animals as sacrifices. All that fear whipped up some wild theories and had everyone on edge. A few brave souls decided to face their fears and snoop around. They formed search crews armed with flashlights and blades, venturing into the thicket to get answers. Every time they'd come back empty-handed, but with tales of spooky sounds and shadows they couldn't explain. With things getting crazier, the local PD decided to get serious. We set up security cameras in the hot spots and ramped up night patrols. I was on those patrols, and each night was a test of nerve. We interviewed folks who swore they'd seen the woman in the thicket. Their stories were eerily similar. A ghostly lady with some kind of carcass always nearby. Some said they felt this dark presence when she was around. I had the scariest moment of my life one night on patrol. It was me, Officer John Miller, Detective Sarah Rodriguez, and newbie Kevin Brooks. We're trekking down a trail when we hear this weird moaning. We decide to follow the sound, which leads us to a clearing. There, in the middle of it all, is the woman in the thicket, kneeling with something in her arms. "You seeing this?" Kevin whispers, fear crackling in his voice. "Yeah," Sarah replies, eyes glued on the woman. "We gotta approach real careful." As we inch closer, we see she's holding onto a dead dog. The stench hits us hard. When we try talking to her, she slowly stands up, her black eyes locking onto mine. They're like voids, nothing there but emptiness. "Ma'am, we need you to drop that and come with us," John says, trying to keep cool. She stares us down for a second, mutters something we can't make out, then poof, gone in a blink. We're frozen stiff with fear. "Was that real?" Kevin asks, his voice shaky. I don't know," I manage, still trying to wrap my head around what just went down. After that night, the whole town was shook. Word spread fast and folks were bugging out. A bunch of them packed up and split, worried about their families. Cops stepped up patrols, but the woman in the thicket never showed her face again. To this day, I still wonder what the heck I saw that night. Was it some spirit? Or a real person with some crazy powers? I don't know, and that uncertainty keeps the fear creeping. The thicket's still off limits for most, and while the pet disappearances have slowed, they ain't stopped for good. He retold the story of the bushes lady. In so many ways, it was an admission that we might never explain everything. Unknowledge can truly make someone hysterical, and the best thing here is often to keep away from it. But for those who decide to face it head on, the memory of that freaky encounter sticks with them like an invisible scar. Man, this is a true story, and every resident in our town is a testament to its reality. I never thought I'd get caught up in that until that day. It was summer, but before that, there was this storm that changed everything in our small town. Rain that seemed like the end of the world, lightning streaking across the sky, and thunder that shook the structures. No one imagined that was just the beginning of what was to come. I lived in a quiet neighborhood where everyone knew each other and kids played on the streets until late. But then talk started about a dark shadow moving across the rooftops at night. At first I thought it was just talk, people wanting some excitement in their already chill lives. Things really changed when Helen disappeared. She was a character, always with a smile that lit up everything around her. I remember the last time I saw her, at the downtown cafe. She was talking about some weird dreams she'd been having since the weather turned. I just laughed, thinking it was all in her head, you know. Her mind wandering because of all those thunderstorms. That night after the storm, the air still felt heavy, strange. I was almost drifting off to sleep when I heard a noise on the roof. It was like a soft dragging sound, like something moving slowly. Curiosity mixed with fear, and I went to look out the window. That's when I saw it. A dark shadow, darker than the night itself, moving quietly across the neighbors' rooftops. It was like it was gliding, making no noise, almost floating up there. My heart raced instantly. I had no idea what I was seeing. I thought about calling someone, but fear made me stay quiet, not knowing how to explain what I was seeing. The days that followed were way too tense. The whole town felt heavy, like everyone was feeling the same fear. News of Helen's disappearance spread fast. The cops were on it, people were gathering in vigils, but the black shadow kept moving on the rooftops at night. Some swore they'd seen it more than once, always in the dark, always far away, always avoiding the light. That image wouldn't leave my head. The shadow, the non-stop rain, Helen's weird dreams. It seemed like everything was connected, but there was no logical explanation to put together the puzzle pieces. And then came the night I decided to face my fear head on. I climbed up onto my roof, flashlight in hand. The moon was hidden behind clouds, the wind making that whistling sound between the eaves. I looked around, trying to act calm, but my heart was pounding. And there, in the corner of the neighbor's roof, I saw the shadow again. It stopped, like it knew I was there, watching. We stared into the darkness for what felt like forever. No face, no definite shape, just that deep darkness that chilled me to the bone. I was gripped by fear when the shadow vanished very quickly in a twinkle of an eye, with a shiver running down my spine as if it never existed. I climbed down from the roof trembling, adrenaline still pumping. I knew I couldn't tell anyone about this. People would think I was losing it, just scared or imagining things. But I saw it with my own eyes. And since then, I can't ignore the feeling that something really bad is watching us from the shadows. Helen never showed up again. The town slowly went back to normal, but the fear lingered. Sometimes, on the darkest nights, I still hear that soft, dragging sound on the rooftops. And I wonder if we'll ever uncover the truth behind that black shadow that moved like a ghost among us. People started speculating what that mysterious figure could be. Some swore it was a werewolf, a creature that came out on full moon nights to hunt. Others talked about obsessive spirits, entities that took advantage of storm energy to appear. Some said it was a witch, a sorceress capable of turning into shadow and walking the skies. And the skeptics, those who didn't believe in anything beyond, thought it could just be a clever monkey or some agile animal moving on the rooftops, fooling the scared eyes of those who saw it. Each theory only added to the mystery and fear of the already chilling story. But for me, who faced that shadow up close, no explanation was enough. The truth remained lost in the darkness, just like Helen and so many other secrets our town kept. Please like and subscribe if you are enjoying.